Let's move on and cram our brain with some more interesting details about functions in JavaScript. These are all very important to know so that there isn't unexpected behavior when you work with JavaScript code. Here we talk about pass by value. This is a very common term and it's very important, so please pay close attention. Strings and numbers, but not objects, are passed by values to functions. Strings and numbers in JavaScript are passed by value when you use them as input arguments to a function. So what does that mean? When a variable which is an input argument to a function is a string or a number, within the function a copy of that variable is made. A copy of the string or the number is made. The function then works on the copy. It does not work on the original string or number which exists outside the function in what is called the calling code. The function only works on the copy that is made inside the function. What does that mean? This implies that any modification to the string or the number inside the function does not affect the original. So even if the function modifies the variable, the original remains unchanged. Is that too complicated? We'll be seeing an example of how this works. This statement might seem intimidating at first, but don't worry, it'll become second nature as you program and practice. Within a function, if you've passed in a string or a number to a function, any change you make to that string or number in that function is not reflected outside. It does not change the original values that you passed in. Here is some code which will help explain this further. There are two functions defined here. Pass by value example is the main function that we'll deal with, and pass by value example will call the modify x function that you can see in the lower half of your screen. Pass by value example will pass in a string and a number argument to the modify x function, and modify x will try to modify the string and the number, and we'll see what happens. As usual, we'll step through and explain what this code does in simple units. We'll start at the very first step where we declare two variables. One is of type number, that's the variable x equal to 10, it's of type number, and another is a string, var y is equal to Vitthal. So there are two variables, one is a number and the other is a string. We just said that numbers and strings, when they are passed into a function, are passed by value. Modifications to numbers and strings are not reflected in the code which calls that function. Here we call the function modify x and pass in x and y to this function. Modify x is a function which will try to modify x and y. X and y are numbers and strings respectively. Let's see what this modification does and how it affects the x and y in the pass by value example function. What does modify x do? Leaving aside all the console.log statements within modify x, it basically tries to change the value of the variables that has been passed into it. It modifies the values of the variables passed in. So it adds some number is equal to some number plus 10 and some string is equal to Humpty Dumpty. Remember that some number was x, whose original value was 10, and some string was y, which was passed in, whose original value was Vitthal. The thing to remember here is that even though these variables have different names within modify x, and they can be the same names or different, We are trying to modify a copy of x and y. What modify x works on is a copy of the original number and string that was passed in. We zoomed in to the meat of the logic right now. This is how the code looks overall. The extra stuff is just the console.log statements to see the values of x and y and some number and some string within the function. Now, when we run this, what do we get? This is the output that's printed to the console when we run this bit of JavaScript code. Let's parse this one line at a time. The initial values in the calling function, and the calling function is the function which called modify x, is 10 and Vitthal. That was the original values assigned to the variable x and to the variable y. Now, when these values are passed into the modify x function, we are first making sure that the values that was passed in was indeed 10 and Vitthal. That's true, that you can see from the first line that's highlighted. And the second line shows you that the values passed into the function have indeed been modified. They've changed to 20 and Humpty Dumpty. So we have indeed modified those values within the modify x function. When control returns to the calling code after modify x has been called, the final values in the calling function are 10 and Vitthal, exactly the same as the initial values. They've remained untouched. The reason for that is modify x only got copies of the number and the variable that we passed in. Modify x performed its operations on the copies. The original in the calling code was not affected, and x and y in the calling code continue to retain their values of 10 and Vitthal.